Corkscrew at Silverwood Theme Park is a piece of roller coaster history. To get right to the point, this was the world's first modern-day inverting coaster. This coaster originally opened in 1975 at Knott's Farm in Buena Park, California. The first coaster to go upside down in the modern era was built by Aerodynamics, and once again we see the innovation of Aero. The ride layout is very simple, but those two corkscrews are a spectacle off-ride, and were a unique experience for those on-ride. This was an important coaster for Knott's and Aero, but of course, it was important for the theme park industry as a whole. The following year, some notable coasters like Turn of the Century at both Marriott's Great Americas opened in 1976, along with Revolution at Six Flags Magic Mountain, which was the first to feature a vertical loop. The latter was built by German manufacturer Schwarzkopf. Both Aero and Schwarzkopf really were innovative in the theme park world. These two companies, in particular Aerodynamics, gave us so many of the coaster designs and elements that we see today. A lot of these Aeros don't run super well in 2025, and we'll talk about Corkscrew here in a minute, but we should be thankful for everything that Aero did before they went bankrupt about 2 decades ago. All that to say, Corkscrew might look small for our standards in 2025, but this was a really important coaster. Now, for anyone who happens to be confused, yes, Corkscrew did open at Knott's Berry Farm in 75, but it closed there in 1989, and Silverwood Theme Park scooped it up, opening in Idaho in 1990. So this was an important coaster for the theme park industry as a whole, but I would also argue that this was an important coaster for its park. Up until this point, Silverwood had not built a thrill coaster by any means, and so this was the first thrilling attraction that they brought in from a roller coaster standpoint. And it paved the way for some of their original coasters, like Timber Terror, the wood coaster that opened in 1996, and its sister CCI coaster, Tremors, which opened 3 years later in 1999. All of these attractions within the decade of the 90s helped bring eyeballs to this park and make it what it is today. And from that standpoint, Corkscrew was the first step in the right direction. If you visit the park now, you'll probably notice that Corkscrew does not receive the lines that a lot of the other rides in the park do. I think for a lot of people, this is more one of those one-and-done attractions, and if you don't really know the history, then you might be even less inclined to give it a ride, just because of its age and things like that. And while the corkscrews look nice off-ride, this is not one of those attractions that really pulls you in like some of the other roller coasters in the park. That said, I do really enjoy those red trains running on the track. I think they look great. All that to say, this is not a ride I would recommend going to first. I think the rides in Roller Coaster Alley are the ones that you should do first, and in Corkscrew is one you can probably do later in the afternoon with a pretty minimal wait. This ride is located in the Country Carnival section of the park. This is the most notable attraction you'll find in the whole area outside of the 2 water attractions. Corkscrew makes a pretty good first impression. You have those corkscrews that look nice off-ride, and there's a decent front entrance. There's also an Ace roller coaster landmark right at the start of the queue. When you reach the station, you'll find your traditional Aerodynamics trains with just over-the-shoulder restraints, no seatbelt. These trains have decent legroom, but aren't necessarily the most comfortable because they have very little padding. That said, if you're a decent height, your head will clear the over-the-shoulder restraints, meaning that even if there are a few jolts in the ride, which there are, you will avoid headbanging. In terms of capacity, I believe they were running 2 trains on the day of my visit, which is good. According to RCDB, they have a theoretical capacity of 600 riders per hour. How accurate is this? That's a really great question, but 600 riders per hour is not a great number, but given the lines this coaster typically receives, I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue for you. So once you pull down your over-the-shoulder restraints, you take a small dip out of the station, turn right, and ascend your lift hill. Now, as you might imagine, because this coaster opened 50 years ago, it is not particularly tall nor fast. Corkscrew stands 70 feet in the air, and when you reach the top, you take a small dip to the right and into your first drop, which stands 62 feet in the air. Towards the back of the train, you might get a little bit of floater airtime, but I don't think you're really going to come out of your seat unless you're in those back couple of rows. While the turn into it has some weird profiling, the drop itself is one of the smoother parts of the coaster. But immediately when you start rising up and turning to the right, you can tell that this coaster maybe is a little on the janky side, just because of its age. And in classic old Aerodynamics fashion, the track profiling is definitely not smooth. It's a little bouncy, you'll feel some side to side motion, but probably not enough to cause headbanging. You then finish the turn and enter the big moment of the ride, those back-to-back corkscrews. There's no doubt that we've lost the novelty of these a little bit. Corkscrews now are such a common inversion on just about every looping coaster. Because they're so common, they feel very standard to us at this point. It's like, oh yeah, we're on a coaster that goes upside down. Of course there's a corkscrew. Why would I expect anything different? So how did the original corkscrews ride? Well, it maybe is ironic to say, but they don't feel like anything special. The transition in and out of them is a little bit funky, as some of the other transitions on this coaster are, but the corkscrews themselves are actually pretty smooth. Don't expect any huge forces though, both from a positive G-force and hang time standpoint. They do the job in terms of flipping you upside down, and again, for the time, that was revolutionary. But don't expect the best hang time of your life or any crazy forces. From here, Corkscrew takes another small right-hand turn, they really loved right-hand turns on this layout, into the brake run. And thus ends the piece of history in a coaster that probably feels pretty short. And well, you'd be right, because this coaster has just a little over 1,200 feet of track. To put it bluntly, this coaster's prime ride time is not particularly strong. From the time you leave the lift hill to the time you hit the brakes, it's about 30 seconds. Now there are certainly some coasters that have shorter prime ride times, heck even the RMC Raptor Zoo, but obviously those rides are much newer and much higher quality. The half minute of prime ride time on Stunt Pilot feels a lot different than the half minute of prime ride time on Corkscrew, but that's not really anything against Corkscrew. And in a way, it's almost unfair to compare a ride that opened in 1975 with one goal to flip riders upside down to some of these newer coasters that are trying to do many different types of elements. They're so drastically different in their purpose, and obviously they're very different in their execution, and a lot of it has to do with when they were built, simple as that. Now despite the fact that it's 50 years old, and despite the fact that it was relocated 35 years ago, I would say Corkscrew is actually running pretty well. There are no doubt some moments on Corkscrew that are not the most comfortable, in particular if you're on the shorter side and your head doesn't quite clear those over-the-shoulder restraints. But it's certainly not as bad as some other, newer coasters I've ridden. I can't guarantee it won't give you a headache, but I would be mildly surprised if it did. In terms of giving this coaster a final score, it's a bit difficult. I'm going to try to put aside all the historical evidence and historical importance of this coaster, and for just the ride experience in 2025, I think it's a 5 out of 10. Again, it's nothing really against this ride, it's just the reality of this coaster's age, simplicity, and overall very short ride time. But even with all that being said, I give Silverwood a lot of credit for keeping this coaster running as well as I think it is, and I think they will keep it around for as long as they possibly can, as it is a piece of history. And for that reason, I think it is definitely worth a ride when you're at Silverwood Theme Park. You just might not want to go back for a second lap. So those are some of my thoughts on the world's first modern day inverting coaster, Corkscrew, now operating at Silverwood Theme Park. If you've ridden this attraction, let me know what you think of my thoughts down in the comments below and if there's anything I missed. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.